Hello there, this is Top Matters, and right here we bring to you the top stories as it affects the society. Today we are at the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, FCCPC, and we will be discussing with the Executive Vice Chairman, who is Babatunde Ibukera. I am Victor Imam. Today on Top Matters, we are with the Executive Vice Chairman of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. It's nice to have you on the program today, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you provide us with an overview of the FCCPC's mission and its objective in ensuring fair competition in the market?
So the FCCPA, which is the Federal Consumer and Competition and Consumer Protection Act, was enacted in 2019 and it repealed the former Consumer Protection Council Act. And what that was just primarily and entirely consumer protection. But the FCCPA introduced competition, so there's still two pieces to the mandate. But your question is with respect to competition. And what our mandate is with respect to competition is to ensure fair markets and promote choice, innovation, fair prices for consumers, and a level playing field for all businesses. And that has two sides. Even though the two different sides ultimately go towards one thing, which is consumer welfare, but it also, as an ancillary matter, levels the playing field and allows many businesses to operate, whether the small or the big. It's a constitutional imperative in the 1999 Constitution as amended, Section 16, that the federal government and all the organs of the government would exercise their powers in such a way to ensure that the means of production and wealth are not concentrated in just the hands of a few. Essentially, what the constitutional mandate to the government is shared prosperity. And so the competition regulation will be focused on ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to participate in commerce. And that's what our mandate is.
Okay, so what are the specific measures that the Commission has implemented to promoting level competition among businesses?
Quite a number of them. For one, we have a merger regulation regime, which is one of the most robust in Africa right now, to ensure that the combination of businesses do not create monopolies or do not create a concentration that ultimately makes it difficult for others to do business in the same space. We've engaged in investigations and penalized some companies, as a matter of fact, who we believe abused a dominant position or acted in any manner that would either disrupt the market or prevent or substantially lessen competition. In the merger review process, we've had to undertake some difficult business combinations where we had to introduce remedies like asking the company to divest before it could take on another one. And then there's some anticipated or contemplated business combinations that engaged us at what we call the pre-notification consultation, and looking at the dynamics in the market and the players who wanted to come together. It's pretty apparent that that will completely distort competition, and we told them this is not going to be approvable. And that's one of the things we like about our process here, that if you engage at the pre-notification level, we don't need to go through the process and then have a major block. Other things we've done is advocacy, and if you advocacy and advisories, and if you've been following, you see that especially in the informal markets, we're constantly engaging the trade associations to make sure that they do not constitute themselves into cartels, they do not come into a group that makes it difficult for competition to thrive in the market. Other things we've done is continued business education and awareness, intelligence gathering, and surveillance.
Let's talk about identifying unfair practices within the market, and how has the Commission identified such unfair practices, and how has it gone ahead to address them?
And so there are a variety of ways that conduct that is inconsistent with law and violates the law come to our attention. One key way is for us to publish regulations and guidelines so that these businesses know. And many times businesses, when they know what the regulations are, they comply. Not all the time, many times. Most recently, we published regulations on abuse of dominance and restrictive agreements. Because one of the easiest ways to distort competition is to have restrictive agreements, restrictive clauses in your agreement, or exclusivity and time. And so we've got regulations that prohibit that. Just the existence of the regulations and the robust guidelines by themselves is a tool for ensuring that the markets remain fair. Secondly, we do surveillance, and surveillance, you gather information from many sources. Sometimes we have informants, we uh, cultivate local assets in industry, sometimes in companies, who bring information to us. Sometimes we just monitor the markets. Our surveillance activity would let us know where potentially some things are going wrong. And when we find that, we almost always intervene. Sometimes when we see something in the news and we think it's a problem, we issue advisories, many times to businesses or to consumers. We do sensitization amongst businesses. We meet periodically with organized private sector and the different trade and professional associations. And so I think with the combination of all these different tools in prosecution, we've prosecuted some cases sometimes, and has led to some resolution and certainly prevented other conduct of matter.
Okay, I would love you to talk about some of the cases you that has been prosecuted. But before then, I'd like you to identify or take us through the role that you have gone to protecting consumers against fair play. While you're doing that, you also give us instances that you've gone ahead to address such issues, and so you give us an instant so we can understand better.
Okay, so for instance, the airline association at some point announced that airfares would be going up, and it was a uniform announcement, it was coordinated, that the members of the association met and decided, now that's commercial necessity. Competitors in the same industry must compete, not coordinate, and they shouldn't collude. And so we immediately issued an advisory saying that that's against the law, and they didn't like it, but it led to some engagement with the airline operators association, and we're able to unlock that. And more recently, POS operators also issued a similar statement, and we again engaged and said that would be against the law. However, in this particular circumstance, what at least one of the executives did was to dismiss the advisory and dismiss the position of the regulator and insisted that POS operators would proceed lock and step to increase the prices. And what we did was to escalate the regulatory intervention and entered an order against the association and entered an order against the members of the association, prohibiting them from increasing prices in a coordinated manner and prohibiting them from acting based on any understanding, any mutual understanding and consensus with respect to price. I'm glad to see that de-escalated the situation, and we're now engaging with the association to assist them with the areas where a common front is acceptable and where commercially sensitive information should not be exchanged. So I think that's another instance. Those are instances where advisories and public intervention work. In other instances, we've investigated at least a few companies that have paid significant penalties because we engaged in major investigations, depending on the nature of the investigation or what we're trying to discover. Sometimes we proceed first by gathering intelligence and then presenting the intelligence to a court, where the court issues an order authorizing us to execute a search warrant, and we will go in there and execute a search, both of hard documents and electronic data. And do some forensic analysis, gather information, lead sometimes to investigative hearings, and we come up with findings and final order. Other times, it's not by such an elaborate raid or investigation. It's just about asking for information, getting information, analyzing it, and coming to a conclusion. And so there are different ways that we investigate. And in some cases, for instance, during COVID, when we saw that there was price gouging with respect to certain hygiene products and then certain medication, I think it was chloroquine hydroxide, uh, that had become extremely high because there were public information that seemed to suggest there was an acceptable therapy against COVID. And so we saw that prices moved in a manner that was inconsistent with the provisions of the FCCPA, and we prosecuted. And those cases ended up in plea agreements, where the subjects of the prosecution um, came away from court to enter into some kind of an understanding that prohibits them from behaving like that in the future. I think that that has also been a deterrent to others who were not prosecuted in those instances.
That's a very good one, I must say. Okay, so has the Commission collaborated with other government agencies in achieving its mandate, and how has it done that?
Absolutely. So because we're a composite regulator, and we don't regulate any sector. We don't issue licenses to anyone. In fact, the only people who get an approval to do business from us right now are digital money lenders, and that is under a limited and interim framework. We're hopeful that a more standing and robust uh, regulatory framework where the financial regulators take a stronger role in regulating them. Because so that's the only time we approve anything. And so we have to work with all the other regulators who license operators in their business. We work very closely with NAFDAC, we work closely with SOM, NCC, NERC, CBN, NCAA. And so we have memoranda of understanding with many of this. NCA is about to be concluded. We have one with SEC. We're working through the one with NCC. SOM is fine. NAFDAC is fine. And so this is how we do our work. We collaborate for consumer protection, and we certainly collaborate for competition regulation. With respect to regulated industries, there's going to be a merger or a business combination going on in those regulated industries. Even though we ultimately approve the mergers, one of the things we do is that we require the sector regulator to provide an opinion or a position with respect to whether they support or disagree with the proposed merger. So our collaboration is strong.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, now take us through the investigative processes that the Commission follows to ensuring there's a fair play within the market.
I think I spoke to some extent about that earlier on. Our investigation comes from different ways, depending on what it is. Sometimes we start out by issuing a request to an NCI, which is notice of commencement of investigation, to let the target of the investigation know that we're opening an investigation and the subject of the investigation. Sometimes that is accompanied with a summons to produce, identifying certain pieces of information or evidence that we want to analyze as we proceed in the investigation. Other times when we think that an investigation may be compromised if the target of the investigation has advanced information about the investigation, or when we think that there's a potential for destruction of evidence, we'll proceed to the court, get a warrant or an affidavit by the chief executive where applicable, so that we can execute a search, essentially a surprise raid to gather information. When we gather the information, we go one of many tracks. We analyze the information, it can take several weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. And so we analyze the information, and our analysis of the information will lead to one thing or the other. It might support certain findings or interim corrective measures. Some other times it might lead to investigative hearings where we have a reporter and we're taking sworn testimony from employees or other witnesses who are relevant to the investigation. And whichever way, most times it leads to an order to show cause or what we call a preliminary finding, and leads to a final order. And most of our investigations has ended with the target of the investigation recognizing what the problems are and entering into what we call a cooperation and assistance. We have the cooperation and assistance rules where targets of investigation can preempt the final outcome of the investigation by coming in, admitting what they've done wrong, supporting the commission in providing additional information, so that the commission can get to the bottom of it, and in exchange for some form of leniency.
So we want to understand the penalties, or how does the Commission sanction businesses that are found guilty of unfair practices?
There's a statutory sanctions framework in the FCCPA, and It identifies what the penalties are for specific conduct, and then a general penalty section for a bunch of different conduct. And the FCCPA identifies when it's an individual or when it's a company. And when it's a company, and specifically when individuals who are the directive minds of the company, like the directors or the operatives of the company who engaged in the inappropriate conduct, should also be subjected to penalty. For individuals, there are monetary fines and also terms of imprisonment. For companies, there are monetary fines, sometimes specific amounts of money, other times a percentile of what the turnover of the company is, up to a certain limit or from a certain limit. However, we have also created what we call the parallel administrative penalties regime. And so there is an administrative penalties regulation of 2020 that identifies the infractions and determines what the monetary penalties should be. And it has a matrix with aggravating factors, mitigating factors, whether the company came under cooperation and assistance, whether they timely cooperated and assisted, and the extent of the scope of the infringement and how long the infringement went on. So a bunch of different things which are calculated to determine and ensure that there's a level of proportionality between the penalty and the infringement. And so we've applied this periodically to the cases as they come. And so every penalty that we've levied has always landed somewhere based on the law, the act, and the regulations.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges that the Commission faces as it goes ahead to achieving its mandate?
Well, the one thing is that there's a manpower challenge, both from a number of people and then from expertise. Sophisticated or deep competition regulation, something that's just going in Nigeria, and it can be very complex. Competition economics and competition law are quite complex because competition regulation is one of the first cause of extraterritorial jurisdiction, because the FCCPA applies to conduct that occurs or occurred outside of Nigeria but has impacted the Nigerian market. So the training and the learning required for understanding that at the operational level, even at the decision-making level, certainly even at the appellate level, that's something that you don't find quite easily. And then you've got competition economics, which is quite complex, and all kinds of quantitative analysis, market studies, and market analysis that are so important to making the right decisions or determining when things have gone wrong. And so sufficient number of people and insufficient skill is certainly a challenge. But I'd say that so far we've weathered that storm relatively well. It might mean that the few we have are overworked, but I think we have a very knowledgeable and competent people. And we're investing in training, as it were, investing in engaging universities to start focusing on teaching people competition law and competition economics before they graduate, and even at graduate studies level. The other challenge, I'd say, as it is with most regulators of this nature globally, is the funding law. I'd say somehow we've managed so far. And the interesting thing is that one of the ways we've managed to be better funded is to fund ourselves. And so instead of the Treasury can certainly, because of the competing interests and the varied issues, the Treasury is unable to make the kind of provision that is required for this work to be done in the most robust way. And so instead of asking for more money, what we did was to seek autonomy. And now the agency is completely autonomous. And interestingly, now that it's autonomous, it's able to afford its operations even better.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, before I let you go, I would love you to tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a lawyer. I've spent most of my legal career. I started out first as an in-house counsel, but that was a very limited part of my career. Spent most of my legal career in practicing law and litigation, both administrative litigation and then courtroom litigation. I practiced in the US for about 11 years, and there I started out doing administrative practice, representing people before administrative regulators such as the Fccpc, particularly the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the labor boards, and then the Equal Employment Opportunity Office in the United States. And I combined that with appellate work, Immigration Court, Board of Immigration Appeals, U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal, and criminal defense work for the U.S. district courts in different districts. And that's what the vast majority of my 11 years experience in the U.S. was. In returning to Nigeria, I continued with high impact litigation, public interest litigation, big cases, and suing large companies to balance the field. And one of our initial cases was a case against Pfizer in Kano many years ago for a clinical trial that Pfizer had conducted, and that we believed strongly, and there was an investigation that showed inappropriate conduct. So we litigated that, and Pfizer settled. We litigated against the large banks with respect to their IPOs or their other hybrid public offerings and their fiduciary responsibility to investors. Represented regulatory authorities prior to working in government. I used to be outside counsel representing the Civil Aviation Authority, both in litigation, air crash investigation, and even competition and economic regulatory investigation in the aviation sector. And since I took on this role of being a regulator, I would say my knowledge and experience as a litigator has helped me in this work. As a matter of fact, I still litigate. I go to court either to defend the commission when we're sued, or certainly to prosecute on behalf of the commission when we're prosecuting them. Currently prosecuting at least 2 or 3 cases that are ongoing in court.
This looks like work, work, and more work. Okay, so outside of work, what do you do for leisure?
I watch the news. I'm a news junkie. I like to watch the news. And, I like family time. I spend time with family.
It has been a good time discussing with the Executive Vice Chairman of the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, FCCPC, who is in the person of Babatunde Ibukera. We have gone on to discuss how the Commission has gone ahead to achieving its mandate and protecting consumers against unfair practices in the market. It has been Victor Emmanuel, and this is Top Matters.